Welcome to another Wisdom podcast with Jeff Dutch with us today. He is head of growth at ContactOut, which is a company that I use. It's pretty good. They basically are like Apollo, but they offer more. Well, at least with the plan that I have, they gave me a bunch of contacts for outreach. I still use Apollo for outreach, so really grateful for that platform. Jeff has a wild background. He's a wild man, just like I am. We just spoke about Cancun and our crazy stories there. And Jeff has more of those apparently. This podcast, by the way, is brought to you by podfire.com. If you want to start, scale, be invited to podcasts like this one, this is the place to go. We're a podcast agency. If you want to learn from folks like Jeff, connect with them, even have a community as a backend and generate clients off your podcast, podfire.com. Jeff, welcome to the pod. Tell me about yourself. Tell me about your crazy stories. Tell me about ContactOut.
Sure, yeah. I was born in the US, California, the son of a crazy ADHD author who wrote a book that ended up becoming like a 1994 movie with Anthony Hopkins in it called The Road to Wellville. So yeah, I think I learned from him. Adventure. I always wanted travel and adventure. It's a big theme in my family, going back as far as we can remember. And so, yeah, early on in my life, I ended up moving to China. I spent 13 years there. Was working with some crazy startups there. Ran a startup myself that went to like $1 million ARR in the first year, and then got taken down by Matt Cutts, the head of Google's web spam team. And yeah, have work with founders, like you, and and founders in China as well. And now working with Rob at ContactOut, and that's been a fun ride. 3 years. Just
Yeah,
growing
Rob is
that.
quite special himself, right? Like obsessed with
Yeah.
knowledge. He has good content. How did you meet him?
Yeah. So in 2015, I wrote an article called Confessions of a Google Spammer. And
I read it.
you read that? Yeah, it's what I'm known for. I should have come to the podcast with my spam costume. I actually have a costume, a can of spam. So yeah, basically Dharmesh Shah over at HubSpot. I was commenting on one of his blog posts, and he was like, "Wow, you have an amazing story. Would you turn that into a blog post about being a spammer, being a black hat SEO guy?" And I was like, "Sure." I wrote it. They put it on the front page of this inbound.org, which was their little community that they were running back then. And it went like super viral. It got 90,000 shares on Facebook, like millions of views. So like every growth marketer, SEO, digital marketer I run into who's like over the edge of 33 probably has heard of or read this article. And that was how I met Rob. I came to Sydney in 2018. Well, I was tired of the Chinese, the air pollution in Beijing, and came to Sydney and didn't have any friends. Went to an SEO meetup, and there was Rob. I went there because Matthew Howells Barbie, the former VP of growth for HubSpot, was there. He was a guest there, and I sat down next to Matt, trying to be friends with him. And Rob was sitting next to me. And so it was like the three of us. And, I started talking to Matt, and I introduced myself, and he was like, "You're the Jeff Deutsch?" And I was like, "What do you mean the Jeff Deutsch?" He was like, "Dude, your spammer article, he was like, "Yeah, I bookmarked it. I read it when I want inspiration to write." And I was like, "Dude, you're my hero." And then Rob, who was sitting next to me, was like, "Yeah, like, do you want to come help me, like consult for me with my startup?" And I was like, sure thing. And turned out he was like this multi-millionaire founder. He looked like a homeless guy. He's wearing like, you know, dirty sweatpants, but turned out he's like an amazing guy, man, like amazing startup mind, and like incredible, like one of the smartest people I ever met. So been working with
How
him for
did
the
he
last
make
three
his
years.
cash?
So he started off with this coupons site, called Deals Extra, I think it was called. That it was his first startup, and it just made money. So he was using that to be a digital nomad, like back in early 2010s, like probably 2012. Then ContactOut, he just found a way to start getting people's personal email addresses. Don't know how, but that became like this kind of growth loop where like over 500,000 people have installed this Chrome extension and provide like data to the network so that, we have like the freshest data for like personal contact data. And we're working on the sales data as well. You mentioned Apollo, they would be like our, like the number one kind of competitor. I don't know if they would consider us a competitor yet. We will be, but yeah, and so that's how he made his money, is mostly through ContactOut. Actually, we have about a
How
few
did you
thousand
make your
like
money?
customers. How I made my money was we did $1 million in sales. We got like 3,000 B2B customers with my startup, that the link building startup that Confessions of a Google Spammer talks about. And then so made all that money and then spent it all over the next like 6 years trying to all the kinds of crazy startup ideas. And none of them worked. So that's how you can make and lose a lot of money. I think arrogance, is the way to lose it. I was just very arrogant. But yeah, it was just the way that worked and why that worked. It was a growth loop. It was like the perfect growth loop. We advertise on forums, and back in the day, there was two forums called Warrior Forum and Wicked Fire, and they were like where all the spammers went. And so like we had our deal up there, and basically we just asked people to, when we would send them the report of, hey, here's your links, we would ask them to, yeah, if you're happy with the results, could you please post a testimonial on the thread? And that would bump it to the top, so that our thread was always at the top for like 6 months, 9 months, whereas usually you would have to pay, or you could only bump it like every 2 to 3 hours or something like that. Ours is constantly at the top, so people are always seeing it. And then more sales, more testimonials, more bumping, more, yeah. So my first growth loop.
Fascinating. And I read the article myself. So apparently you had two condos, one with your wife in, your ex-wife that is, and one with yourself in. You're playing
Yep.
basket, you were spending your money like there were no ends, and one day the algorithm broke. I mean, I'm familiar with that scenario, lived it with various of my agencies. I mean, Facebook ads when they started banning the shit out of everyone. Second, LinkedIn when they started limiting connections, think
Uh-huh.
it's kind of, yeah, don't depend on these platforms. That's why I love cold email, no one can ban me off cold email. Email's about to
Yeah.
stay pretty much forever. It's really anti-fragile. What do you think about that?
Yeah, I think that hacks are like required at the beginning of every business. Like I think every like major company out there, there's none of them that didn't do some kind of growth hack or find some loophole like that, like cold email or or forums or whatever, or like even LinkedIn, like right? Like LinkedIn's got their start by they would, you would sign up and they connect to your Gmail, and then they would send every single person in your contact book an invitation to join you on LinkedIn. And then they got in hot water because of it. They're like, oh, you're spamming people with my email. But that's how they got their initial growth, and they don't do it anymore. But and because that seems spammy, but like, I think what I've learned is you get these growth loops, like, okay, every sign up, you connect to the contact book, and you send, invitations to all of their friends, on the person's behalf. And then and then you build kind of value into the product so that it's like people can keep coming back to it, because that loophole is not going to last forever. But if you can get that initial like core and product market fit with that hack, and then like keep people there with a really good product experience, like your podcast, for example, like it wouldn't survive forever if you just kept on cold emailing people to like come and listen to my podcast. But if you do that, and then in the podcast there's a good growth loop, like a good referral or sharing mechanism for the podcast, of course it's going to keep growing. You're not going to keep on doing like the hack forever. So
Yeah, okay, so I
yeah.
need advice on that.
Yeah.
The first growth loop, I think, I mean, the cold email part of the pod can scale forever because I believe there's like 5 or 10 million CEOs out there. Forget like the amount of folks, but basically, every time I get a guest, they share on their LinkedIn. Every time I cold email someone for them to be on my podcast, they need to check the podcast, right? So that's
Yeah.
that's one growth loop. Just that I'm not sure how to have my guests share the pods. I think my growth loop sucks because it's like, hey, if the pod gets more than 100 views, I'm gonna, what did I I'm gonna make YouTube Shorts. If the pod reach 1,000 views, I'm gonna sponsor it for an equal amount of views with YouTube ads, right? So what would be a better growth loop for my podcast that is hosted mostly, by the way, on YouTube?
Yeah, I mean, getting people to share it on their own network, I think is the key. And so then like, yeah, if there's something special about it, if there's some like new story or, that like hadn't been revealed or yeah, then I think they would, people are more likely to share it. I'll probably share this on my LinkedIn. I'm a very open, transparent guy. Maybe some people are like more protective of their image and like Dharmesh from HubSpot, I interviewed him and I was like, hey, we'll have a call. He was like, nah, send me the questions. And then, and then I'll answer by email because he's really protective of like, what he says and how he's, so yeah, I think if there's some mechanism in your podcast for like people to apply to be the next guest, like that's the key, right? Because then if I'm sharing this on my LinkedIn and then like other heads of growth, like, I've got Vinny Way who grew, Veed or like Andre from Canva who grew Canva or whatever. They see that and they see quality, then they'll be like, oh, I'll hit up, call me. So yeah, I think it's like giving people guidelines of exactly how to share it and then like how to make the growth loop inside it. Like for example, saying, okay, make it a LinkedIn post. Here's a sample one that was like really successful. And then like also make sure you put my link in there so that people know where to go to apply to be the next guest on the show and stuff. So but yeah, that was something we found at VIP Kid, like that this is this like tech unicorn that I was the head of growth for in China. It was like half of our growth was from referral, but the teachers, it was a marketplace of teachers in the US teaching English to kids in China. We had to like tell them exactly what to do by like first looking at the people who are good at referring and bringing a lot of like teacher referrals in the door. And I'd go and interview them and they'd go, and I'd be like, how did you do it? What was your secret sauce? And they're like, oh, I showed people my check from the company, the first check that I got from teaching online. And that was when I got like, 1,000 people use my referral link to go and sign up. And I'm like, okay, great. Another person was like, oh, I printed out this flyer that says, go to this link and use my affiliate code. And I cut that out on the paper cutter at school and put one in each cubby hole of each teacher because each teacher has their own mailbox. And so we're like, okay, great. We're going to make sure that, every teacher who signs up, we're going to tell them like, hey, show your paycheck. And then here, we're going to even give you a thing that you can print out, cut and put in the cubby holes of, the other teachers. So it's like understanding that and then like telling them exactly what to do so that you can get like maximum, viral growth. Yeah.
Right. Tell me about SEO
Yeah.
nowadays with AI, like, do you think I can scale SEO with just well prompted AIs and GPTs to write me the right blog at the right time with the right keywords?
We've experimented with this. I experimented with it with like software reviews and didn't work at all. And I think it was because the keywords were too high competition. But I think where like chat works really good. And I'm actually, so I run a fantasy football league with like some of the world's best SEOs, which is like a really fun side quest for me. And they're talking now about like it being possible. I haven't learned too much about it. So I'm still on this journey myself. But I know that the key is like finding long tail keywords because like Google, um, they know when you're using AI content, like they know. But if you have a resource that doesn't exist, anywhere else, like, and it's super long tail, then they'll be like, well, we have no choice but to show this, even though we know it's AI, we're going to show this anyway in the search results. So like long tail things. And the one example that that I thought of, just because I'm into fantasy football, the football season just started was like, doing player comparisons, like is this player worth trading for this player? So it'd be like player name and player name, or player name plus two player names. And this is like the long tail, long tail search. So you could do like player versus player, then the year, or that kind of thing. So it's like if it doesn't exist, if the keyword difficulty is 0, I'd say go for it. But like if it's like anything over 10, 20 in Ahrefs, like there's no point because there's someone else has already written probably something custom by a human, so it'll match those EEAT guidelines better. Why do it? you're just not going to do anything better.
Right. Well, nowadays at Contact Out, like how much of your time is on SEO via these other growth mechanisms, and what do you have in the pipeline for that here?
Let's see. Okay, I'm doing 7 different growth experiments right now, simultaneously, and one of those is SEO. So it's like 14% of my effort going into SEO. And it's kind of like it's a little bit whack-a-mole based on like what I find is actually working. Like I did it, B2B influencer stuff for a while, and that hit really good and it looked great. And then it's like, the well seemed a little dry. So I'm like, okay, we're moving off that onto other stuff. So but yeah, SEO, this long tail thing, I think is really it's really good, and we depend on that a lot for our people directory. It's usually how people find us. They're like Charles Cormier, Podpire, contact details. They'll Google that, and then they'll find us and sign up for Contact Out through that. So I'm like, I think if we could improve the profiles through that, we probably could start beating like Apollo on more of those keywords and all the other. There's so many people doing this now, so it's like, how do you do it different? That's the
Rocket
question.
Reach.
Dude, there's so many. There's so many, and so like, it's like, how do you do it different? Everybody's got their own scheme, but yeah.
Dude, we need a round two, absolutely. So
Sure.
let's book that like right after we're done. But until then, where can people find out more about you?
Yeah, just go read my article first, I think. Go look at Confessions of a Google Spammer, and that is a pretty good filter. If you read that and you're like, this guy is an idiot, we probably won't be friends. So like, it's not worth like pursuing anymore. If you're like, oh, okay, he was a weirdo Chinese growth guy who lived in China, cheated on his wife, and grew magic mushrooms in his closet. Like, I don't like, that's a pretty good filter. So if that doesn't turn you off, then yeah, just uh, hit me up on LinkedIn, add me, tell me something interesting about yourself. Please don't send me like, oh, I see we have 116 connections in common. Yeah, it's not going to work. But if you're like the way you reach out was really, really good, man. Like, I think just to like shout out to you, I think your cold outreach is awesome. Like, look forward to working with you more. And like, yeah, just do what Charles, like, actually just everybody listening, just do what Charles says, because he's right. Like he's doing it different. And so I'm loving it, man.
Dude, thank you for the compliments. That was
Of
Jeff
course.
Deutsch, everyone. So we're gonna do another one. Stay tuned for that one. And if people want to start their own podcast, Kel, or be invited to one, that is podfire.com. This was Jeff Deutsch again, mesdames et messieurs.